Thanks, everybody. This is going to be fun to share this information. Some of these photos have never been seen for a long, long time, so it's going to be a pleasure to show them to you. First of all, I'd like to start off by saying, who here had their picture taken by Jack Saunders? Through school, or sports teams, or babies, wedding pictures. Yeah, Rita had wedding pictures. So he did a lot. I think over 1,000 weddings, he once told me. So there was a lot of negatives when we found them. Also, who here has a camera with them right now? I bet you all have a camera with you right now. In 1945, that wasn't the case. Cameras were more of a precious commodity and maybe only brought out on very special occasions. And so the photography or the role of a photographer was different than it is now, perhaps because every one of us are amateur photographers now. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is just a bit of our Saunders history in Collingwood. My dad's grandmother, Amma Nordhoff, was born here in 1865. That's the first one of our gang that I can prove was born in Collingwood. Then his grandfather, Norman Saunders, came in approximately 1880. My grandfather, Dalton, was born in Collingwood in 1894, and Dad was born on December 21st, 1919, to Viva and Dalton, and he's the second of their 3 children. Next slide, please. So then he goes to school all through Collingwood schools and joins the Navy almost as soon as he could. In 1939, and he was in for the whole 6 years. And there you can see my mom and dad's wedding picture. So they married in, my mother's name was Bessie Ridgway. She was a registered nurse. She was a graduate of the Collingwood General Marine. And they married in 1942, and when he returned home from the Navy in 1945, he knew he already wanted to do a photography business. You can see that in the wedding photo, the lady in the pink there is Jessie Chessel, and that is Jeannie Barclay's, Jeannie Mackeson's aunt? Yes. So we have connections there too. Next, please. So this gives you a kind of overview of all the different types of photography he did. Basically, he did anything that they would pay him to do it. Obviously, he was in business, he was quite an entrepreneur, and so he was often out the door at all hours, and we hardly ever saw him on weekends because of the wedding season especially. Sports teams, anything that he was a contributor to the Toronto Telegram too, some of his photography. So there was a ton of information. So I was very lucky to get all these negatives, and I have some information, resource information, and they're basically based on 2 newspaper articles, one from 1964 and one from 1989. So there was some information there that I could quote to you, and that's where I got those. And then my mother wrote her own history of the businesses in 2003, so that was a big help to me too. Dad didn't have any formal photography experience or education, except from a neighbor, Mr. Barclay, Jeannie's grandfather, who they were neighbors on Niagara Street. Am I right there? Yeah. Okay. But during his Navy career, he tells of developing photos on the ship, which was a big no-no. But he was an Aztec operator, so he had to sit in darkness and with headphones on, listening for submarines. So that was his job. And but he, just to make pocket money, developed photos for his shipmates, basically. And once he was home, he knew he wanted to go into the photography business. So he started looking all over the area for a photography business to buy. He hitchhiked to Kincardine, but luckily didn't find anything there, so we got to stay in Collingwood. So D.O. Deacon, was a photographer, had sold his studio to Nick Hodson, which many of you know, I think. Nick was unable to use the chemicals after he bought the photography business. He didn't realize that he wasn't going to be able to do it because of the chemicals that were needed in the developing of the films. And so he sold the business to my dad for $400. Which he had saved up from his pay. And the first studio was located at 103 here, Ontario Street, or as in Mom's notes says, near Potts' Dairy. But that's not going to do it. Not everybody here may be a lot of good because might not know where Potts' Dairy is, but 203 here, Ontario Street is, I think, vacant right now, but it's had a tattoo parlor in it, I think, most recently. The business came with equipment, including a 1920 Eastman View camera, which we have here tonight, courtesy of my brother David. Jack ran the only 24-hour service from 1947 to 48, traveling to various locations, mostly in Wasaga Beach. He serviced the different resorts and businesses in Wasaga Beach, and he would go down on his motorcycle, a lot of the times with my older brother John in the sidecar, and they would get the films and then bring them back, develop them overnight, and then take them back the next day and do the same thing over and over and over again. It was a pretty difficult life, but he was happy to do it, and he knew he wanted to keep going at it. So there was only 2 professional photographers in Collingwood during the 1950s. The other one was Herb Hall. So Jack sold part of his photography business to Herb Hall when he tired of the 24-hour service business. The studio was moved from 203 here, Ontario Street, to 59 here, Ontario Street, formerly Brown's Bookstore. When Jack bought Brown's Bookstore business, but not the building. There's a story that goes along with this. The owner of 59 here, Ontario Street, was very upset with Dad when he actually had purchased the next door building and was going to move his business there. So the owner of the building where he was currently in kicked him out overnight. Evicted him, be out by noon tomorrow, kind of thing. So that nothing stopped my dad. So he went down to the Legion and corralled a bunch of the fellas, and they got the whole store moved over to the next store in overnight. The studio was moved to 57 here, Ontario Street. It had previously been the A&P grocery store, and it was damaged by fire in 1948, and my dad bought the building in 1953. The studio was located at the back of the store, which now also featured paint and wallpaper, school supplies, and office equipment. The office was above the studio. The one vivid memory I have is as a child of about 5 or 6, I was running around in the studio, probably had been warned many times not to do so, and that camera over there, I knocked it over. My mother hustled me out of that place pretty quick. I'm not sure how old I was when I was allowed to go back into the studio again, but that was something that really stood out in my memory anyways. Okay, so I'm going to start now with the actual photos, and I had great difficulty picking out which photos to use tonight. I did it the first time, and then I realized I was going to have you here till midnight, so I thought, nah, they probably won't like that. There are 3,700 digitized pictures, but they were taken in the days when you didn't just take a picture and then look at it and say, oh, well, so-and-so has her eyes closed, so better take another one. So there's multiples of the same shot in a lot of cases. So I've concentrated this section on buildings and businesses that are no longer with us or have been greatly changed. The slides are all numbered, and I hope you will pick up a piece of paper, there's some at the door and pens as well, that you can help me with the identification of the locations or correct me if I got it wrong. I know some of you in the room here will know more about these photos than I do. Many of them were taken before I was born. So hopefully this isn't a sort of a learning experience for me too, so that I can add to these photos and keep them more interesting for people. So just write down the slide number and any additional information you may have, or if you prefer, you could just give me your phone number and I'll call you and we can chat about what other information you might have about them. So, can I have the next one, please? So here we're starting off, a lot of people will recognize that, Brewers Retail, beer store, corner of Simcoe and St. Marie Street. It was before the beer store Palace Livery. It was demolished in 2007 and is now the site of the Collingwood Public Library. Just as a side note, my grandfather, Jack's father, Dalton, worked there at one time. So Bryan Manufacturing, I remember it as being around the area of the current Sobeys. Is that about right to people that know? Yeah. Good. And I remember it as the short-lived career as Collingwood Youth Centre in the 1960s. That was a lumberyard right down by where Sobeys is now. Next one, please. Belcaris, you can see that quite fancy building in the background there. It was a house. And it was demolished in 1954 for the construction of the Collingwood District Collegiate. And in the background, you can see Maple Street and the Victory Homes along Maple Street. It was a beautiful, too bad we didn't have a heritage committee back in that day. We would have saved that house. Next one, please. So this is dredging the harbor. I think this is taken from the spit on Heritage Drive, looking south towards the downtown. I'm not sure if everybody agrees, but next one, please. So this one is a building that's still with us, but I included it in this because it has greatly been changed since this picture was taken. And in addition, in the background, over to the right, you can see the band shell, which was demolished in favor of the Collingwood YMCA. So the next one, please. So now we're downtown. So view of your Ontario, looking north towards First Huron Street. Taken from, I think this is taken from the roof of our store at 57 Huron Ontario Street. My brother David, I think, was with my dad when he was doing it, so he told me about that. Next one, please. So on these photos of downtown, as I was checking through them, I realized there was a few clues given in these photos about when they were taken. So if you see this one, you can see that there's a town hall clock. And a lot of them you see that it's just a blank. So the town hall clock was installed in 1951. And so that tells you this was after 1951. And also the centennial lights that span the street, you can just sort of see them there. And they were from 1958. And they were the 100th anniversary for the 100th anniversary of the town. So you can kind of look at these photos and say, okay, well, it's got this or that, and so that you can help date it. So next one, please. So this is the East End in 1954, looking west of Peel and Mulberry Street, and that's the Peerless Building. East Enders, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how many trees there were. Next one, please. So the Dominion Hotel, Julian Ferguson Building, Dorchester Hotel, and current location of George McBain Gallery and Read It Again books. I'm guessing this is the 1940s, just from the look of that car. But if you see in the foreground, there's a parking meter, and that's kind of strange looking, I thought. So then I looked a little bit more, and I found out that Dad had been hired by the parking meter company, the Red Ball Parking Meter Company, to do photos from before and after photos of the old parking meters and the new parking meters. So we know that that helps to date the the picture then because the new photos were from 1952. So if we have the next one, you'll see those are, I think, the later ones, but I have another picture that's clearer of that. And I've got my slides out of order, I think, but I think that's looking towards, I think from maybe the town hall, and looking towards the corner of, with Hammond's Drugstore, now Century 21. Next, please. Oh, there's the one I'm thinking of. That is, I think, the new parking meter, new in 1952. So that was used apparently by the Red Ball company as a promotion for other municipalities. So that photo was used across the country as an example. And Bill, this is the one I thought that maybe your dad's store was in. Chapman's Drugstore would be just down there, but
I think I've seen some.
yeah, Krogman's was right near to our own store, so I think that's probably why I took it there. Next, please. So this is First Street, looking east near Walnut Street rail line. It's not a rail line anymore, but it is actually the location of the Jack Saunders Bridge, which is kind of interesting. When my dad was on council, he formulated the idea to have Harborview Park. And so in recognition of that, many years later, the town built the boardwalk that connected First Street to the rail line and Harborview Park and called it the Jack Saunders Bridge, which was very nice. But it's also Shipley's Mill, and where's Jane? There you are, Jane. You recognize that one?
Yep.
That's her family's mill. Next, please. Hey, this was George and China. It's on the east side of Balsam Street, currently Harbor Business Center at 20 Balsam Street. The interesting thing I think about this one is, can you see there's a train? It looks like it's just going to go across in front of there. There were train tracks that went that along there. And during my work with the town of Collingwood in the building department, I saw drawings when they were redoing that building, and it showed the rail line on there. So it must have been an active rail line going up to Meaford, I suppose. That building, sorry, Jerry Dell?
Went to Kaufman's.
Pardon? Oh, went to Kaufman, so that makes sense. Thanks. This building here burned on May 29th, 1965. So that's, it's been various things since then. The candy factory was there for a while. But I remember it as George and China and going there after the Santa Claus parade just to visit Santa and get a little treat. A cup with an orange and a candy cane. Next, please. So this is Victoria's School. And the famous fire escape there. Now, this one, I think I'm dating to before 1965 because it's the Union Jack. And so this is part of the school that was actually demolished in the late 1960s when Cameron Street School was built. Next, please. So there's our harbor. I think it was taken from the terminal building, looking down and back in towards the town. It's when our harbor was a lot more active with commercial activity than it is now. Next, please. And similar, only looking the other way, and ice huts that were quite popular, and fish boats. I don't know whether that's the Drever's boat there, but it's probably one of them. Next, please. Anne Long's nurses' home. So this is where the nurses lived that were getting their education at General and Marine Hospital. And it was on Moberly Street. Now it's part of the hospital grounds. But it was demolished in the 1960s, I think. I know my dad got a piece of it to take up to our cottage.
Later.
Later?
It was later than 1971.
Okay.
Because I was in the lab in 71 and we
okay, thank you.
We moved in one day.
Oh,
Moved the whole lab in one day.
you didn't get the guys from the Legion though.
No.
I was born there.
Who said that one? Oh, hi. Me too. So the next one, please. So this is Ontario Street looking north from 2nd. I'm not sure the year of this one. However, one clue is you see Dixon's Grill and Bakery. That burned on December 23rd, 1947. It was a total loss of the business and apartment. And there's the new street lights, which we know came in 1948. Later on when you get a look, there's a series of pictures framed over there of the before and after shots of the main street that were commissioned by Dad was commissioned by the PUC to take. So there's no centennial lights in this picture, so I'm thinking that it's pre-1958. And but you note the site that some of us haven't seen for a long time is a ship at the end of the street. Next one, please. So this is the shipyards. Now that's, I believe that was the day of a launch, and not only was the launch just hitting the champagne against the ship, but they had a lot of big dignitaries visiting for that, and they would also have a big reception afterwards. So I think these are some of the people. I really picked this picture because of the building in the background. Is that the boiler shop? Electrical shop? Okay, we'll have to change that. And next, please. Now, this is the Regent Theatre. It was also, I believe, Bull Brothers Garage. And after this, it was a CKCB radio station and the bingo parlor. So it's only fairly recently demolished, about 2017, I think, and is going to be a new development downtown. The CIBC building is to the left of it, and that was also demolished, I think, in the 60s. Next, please. So this is a whole, I put quite a few of the ones of the Regent Theatre in because it's not there anymore. And so this is some of the interior of the Regent Theatre, the snack bar. Next, please. And the front lobby. Now, I dated this one because I could see that movie poster, and I looked up on, Google's great. I looked up on Google to see when that movie was out, so I could figure out what day, when this was from approximately. And the next one, please. And then the actual theater part. Okay, next. Okay, Quinlan Crawford, Balsam Street, manufactured Hassocks car seat covers and cushions, and it burned on June the 1st, 1965. Is that around by where Canadian Tire is now? Anybody?
Yes.
Around in there? Next, please. So Tracy Farm, east side of Ontario Street, north of Poplar in 1952. I believe it's the current site of the Indigo subdivision.
Yes,
Am I right?
my sister owned that property.
Oh, right.
Yeah, after they finished university and had it for many, many years and then sold it to a developer.
Well, I guess there's the evidence of what it once was. Next, please. Okay, this is Max Faith Limited. I think it's around 32 here, Ontario Street, and it's prior to February 1st, 1953. You can see why it's prior to that specific date on the next picture. Well, I put these into a category of events. So, but if you go to the next one, that's what was left of it on February 1st, 1953. So that was, Dad was often called out to do fire pictures. He would work for the Collingwood Fire Department and for the Collingwood Police Department whenever they needed photographic evidence of anything that had happened. And I guess he could, I'm not sure if he could sell those ones, but he also supplied those ones to the newspapers. Next one, please. So this is the same fire, sort of from a different angle and probably the day after. You can see that the store that's next to it was heavily damaged. That was Walker's store. And after this happened, they had to demolish the third floor of this building. So it was only a two-story building after that. And later on in the 1980s, I'm guessing, that's where Saunders Office and School Supply was located.
And it wasn't that Foley's building as well?
It was, there was other businesses involved. There was Foley's and Accamore's repair shop, and it's documented in that book that you have on the table back there. Yeah, so you can look it up. It's right there. That's where I got the dates from. So this was in the 1980s. This is where Saunders Office Supplies was moved to, and then went back over to 57 here on Ontario Street. And this is now part of the Loblaws parking lot, for those that don't know. Okay. So this is another fire that happened November 14th, 1961. And Mostyn's Menswear, Chalet Normand's Steak and Chicken House, Mary Lynn's Ladies Wear at 35 here Ontario Street, now about the relocation of the dollar store, I think.
And at the time of that fire, I don't know what the display was, but I had 2 dolls in the display, and they're darkened because of the smoke.
Oh, from the ladies' wear store then?
I'm not sure which window it was in. I just remember the dolls being in there, and then after the fire, when we took them home, they smelled the smoke, and their arm, anything that wasn't covered by clothing was tinted.
Oh. So if we go to the next one, please. So this is just an example of an accident scene that he would have taken these pictures on behalf of the Collingwood Police for using for evidence of anything, their investigation afterwards. Next, please. So this is firefighting practice. I'm saying it's practice at the shipyards because those guys look way too relaxed and clean to be having a real fire. So I'm thinking that they're practicing on what to do if a ship caught on fire. Next, please. So this is a scene that a lot of us that grew up here were familiar with. Harness racing at the GNE, Great Northern Exhibition Grounds, on Hume Street, now where the YMCA is, and the new arena. But it used to have this track that ran around the whole property, and you always had to be really careful when you were going in to make sure that there wasn't any horses coming, and so we had to be quite careful. But I think this picture has to be prior to 1965 because of the Union Jack flag on this flagstaff there. Okay, here's one of the launches. Actually, you will notice quite a similarity between that and that painting over there. A local artist, Alex Ruston, who's here this evening. Where are you, Alex? Oh, there, Alex. She has used some of the Saunders collection photos as inspiration for a series of paintings. This is just one of hers. There are a number of others that are from the same, inspired from either Saunders photography or other photography that you found on the internet, right, Alex?
Some from the Toronto Library.
Okay, so if you want to have a better look at that later on, that's there in Alex. It is for sale, right, Alex? Next, please. There's another launch. Now this one was interesting. I had it before I had to chop all my pictures out. This is a launch sequence. So he had taken at this position, then next, then next, then next, then next, until it was right in and settled back down. So it was quite an interesting progression, but I didn't have time, or it didn't have space for all of them. On to that though, if next time you want me to talk again about these, I have a whole nother presentation already because I had to chop this one to pieces to make it fit. Next please. So Wasaga Beach was a big part of Dad's business, and he would go to the various resorts and cabins, and he would not only took pictures of the resorts and cabins and then sold them as postcards to the owners of those buildings, but he also took pictures of the people that were staying there. So if you went for a week in August and with your family, and you'd have a group shot of all the people that were at the camp at that time, and so that he would also try and sell those. And I recently was talking to somebody at a Girl Guide event, and they had been a kid in the Wasaga Beach and said that my dad used to pay them a penny a postcard to sell them to because their family owns some cabins, and they were paid a penny a postcard to sell them to their guests. So here's a few from Wasaga Beach. So this is Sunnydale Camp. I have no idea where it was located. It was a good example of one of the postcards. You can see down in the left-hand corner, that's my dad's writing on there, and he would sell them as a postcard to the guests there. Next, please. So this is also a postcard. It's the Oxbow. I call it the Oxbow. It's actually looking east on Mosley Street at Sunnydale Road. Also, I think probably in the 40s, looking from the picture. This is an interesting one. This is at the bridge at Wasaga Beach, but you can see over to the right-hand side the main street. The main drag was still intact then, with the arcade and the amusements and so forth that were there. And I thought this was remarkable for, look at how many trees there were.
Yeah.
Next, please. Now, this isn't a very impressive looking building, but it was the Allistonia. And it might be a familiar sight to some, maybe with some good memories, maybe not. I'm not sure where it was located at the beach, but I know it was a dive.
River Road.
River Road East. Next, please. So this is Barker's Tea Room and Cabins. Obviously on the beachfront, but not sure where. Anybody have any ideas? And next, please. Some more aerial photography. This is near the main street because you can see the river in the background. But I don't know the name of that resort or when it was taken, although you can see in this picture, for those that don't remember or weren't around this area at the time, you used to be able to drive on Wasaga Beach, along the beachfront. You could just go and park and put your picnic basket out and where you are, there you are for the day. Next, please. The Capstan Inn. I'm not sure where that was located either, but it looks like it was also on the beachfront. Next, please. So that's the beachfront with the Dardanella over and just about the middle, I think, of that picture. It also shows West's Beach Store. That was another one of Dad's entrepreneurial adventures. He, for 2 summers, he rented that beachfront, that beach store from West's family. And so my main occupation was collecting pop bottles that got 2 cents each. Next, please. So this is the inside of the Dart, 1949. There's a series of these photos as well. I thought that was really neat to see some of the interiors. Next. Nancy Villa. So it was right beside Nancy Island on Mosley Street. I guess this is another one of his postcards, but he must have had somebody working for him at the time because that's not his handwriting on there. Next, please. This is a prize-winning photo. In my research and in my resources, the story in the Enterprise Bulletin in 1989. This is my dad's words. The door was taken off the hinges and I was hanging out by the seat belt, trying to get the perfect parallel picture, but it didn't turn out. When we were coming over the river, I decided to take a picture anyway. I think he was actually aiming for the main street. After developing the picture, Jack found to his surprise that he'd taken a great shot. It was of a speedboat with a perfect pattern of ripples in the water by Nancy Island. This is Dad's words. It shows you that often good photography happens inadvertently. You don't know that it's happened at the time. This picture won Dad an award from the Ontario Society of Photographers. He served as a director for that organization at one time. Next, please. So this one's at Wilson's Corners. The building's still there. It doesn't look much like that anymore, but that's right about the roundabout at Mosley Street and Beechwood Road. Next. So this is a series of Blue Mountain pictures. You can go on to the next one, please. This is Joseph Wire, 1908 to 1971. Good friend of my dad's. I think they were fellow entrepreneurs. They recognized in each other, and I think my dad was one of the first investors in Blue Mountains. And Jozo hired my dad on many occasions to come and take pictures at Blue Mountains. So here's just a few of them. So this is at the base of the mountain. I'm not sure exactly the location, but it must have been for some ski event. Next, please. There's the roto. Pretty basic, but I guess it worked. Next, please. They installed ski jumping at the mountain for a time. So this guy's in flight. A lot of these pictures you might seem sort of familiar. George Wider borrowed these pictures from us when he was doing his history book of Blue Mountain. So if you've seen these pictures or they seem familiar, that's where you've seen them. Next, please. 1940, I guess. Blue Mountain. I don't know whether it was established in 1940 or whether this picture was taken in 1940. But my brother David tells me the man in the picture is John Pluis. Next, please. So here's the barn, the ski barn. I think this one must have been posed. I don't know if anybody would stand there with their hand out like that. But so that's one version. And I want you to go to the next one, and you'll see that there's did they stucco the side of it? You know, anybody know? Because if you look back, I don't know if you can you go back? It looks like it's rough stone or something there, and then the next one you see it, it's been whitewashed or stuccoed or something. Next. Now I don't know how many pictures there are of the inside of the ski barn, but here's one. I do have a number of other ones. They were quite social, I guess, at that time, and there was different beauty pageants and different things held in the ski barn, and I have some pictures of those. And this is Jozo in it's early Blue Mountain pottery. Not sure who the young man is, and I think is the location the basement of the ski barn? Is that where they started off? Okay, I see heads nodding. Okay, next please. Just going to leave this one up. This is my favorite. It shows the harbor, and if you look at it closely, I was hoping maybe for coffee time we'll just leave that one up and you can have maybe a bit of a closer look at it. It's you can see a lot of differences. I can't even start to name them all. But I'm just going to leave that one up, and this brings to the conclusion most of the pictures I have for you, but I do have a few things that I'd like to add. Thank yous to my mom and dad for being wonderful parents. Mom was a full partner with Dad and very involved with the business, but in her own quiet way. Any of you who remember her will know that she was very much the woman behind the man. And she would often have a great idea and mention it to Dad, might not take right away. But next thing you know, that idea was implemented. Of course, by that time it was Dad's idea. But thank you to Dad for taking and saving the photos that we have shared tonight. Incidentally, he would be 100 years old this year, but not till December. To my brother John for saving the negatives for over 40 years until we could compile the collection. They were in the, a lot of people will know where I'm talking about, the Smarts warehouse up at Campbell Street and High. They were stored in there along with bugs and mice and raccoons and every kind of yucky thing. Cold and hot, like just, all the years around, whether it was freezing or summertime. So they weren't treated nicely, but they we're happy to get them. To my brother David for helping me with the information for this and for saving the camera. I wasn't sure he was going to trust me with it due to my history, and so please don't touch it. To my family who have been very patient with me for not only during this preparing the presentation, but for putting up with the stinky, dirty negatives that were in our dining room for several months while I cataloged them. To the members of my family who are attending tonight, so I hope that learned a bit more family history and more about Grandma and Grandpa as they built the foundation of several successful businesses. So I have my one of the granddaughters and a great-granddaughter here tonight, is Lori and Tessa Fryer. And they brought Tim too.
Yeah.
To Jason Booth for digitizing 3,700 negatives at no cost, just for the love of Collingwood and photographic history. He couldn't be here tonight, he's not feeling well, but he was great to work with, and he just worked away at it and got them all done. He didn't do all of them. I got overwhelmed with the boxes and boxes of negatives, and when I started cataloging, I had all the good intentions of doing the whole thing, didn't work. There were so many baby pictures and wedding pictures and even pictures of people in their coffins and all sorts of interesting pictures, but mostly they would be interesting to the people who were family members of those people. So I just got overwhelmed, so I sorted through them and sort of went, well, which ones are going to be interesting to people? So I saved all the school pictures and many, many others. That's the 3,700. On the table here, you'll see there's an Excel spreadsheet that's printed out, and that's my master cataloging list. So if you're wondering if we have a certain picture or a certain school group or something like that, you can look through that and see. I'm not at liberty to give you the photo, but they are available. What had to happen to the negatives themselves was that they needed to be specially treated. We didn't know that when we had them up in the warehouse. And but when I offered them to the Collingwood Museum, they said they couldn't handle them because these negatives apparently had to be put in a freezer. Who knew? They're so volatile that you're supposed to have them in a freezer. So I have donated, the family has donated them to the Simcoe County Archives. So they are available. All the pictures that are digitized, they have a digitized version of them. There were 11 boxes altogether, 4 of which represent the 3,700. So there's a lot more there than what we have digitized. So good luck in trying to figure out what. You'll see I have given here a sample of one of the envelopes. That's the way I got them. And Dad would scroll on it, maybe the bride's name or, something like that. He'd also would do color photography. He'd started doing color photography later on in the 50s. But I don't have any of those because being the entrepreneur that he was, apparently he found out that you could have the silver reclaimed out of negatives. And so he turned them all in to get the silver content out of them. So we're lucky to have the ones that we do have. The rest of them are gone. But thank you to the archives. They will give you a copy of the picture digitally for $10. And then you will take that to whatever place you want to have, whatever size of print you want to have made, and they will, and so that part's up to you. Also, I'd like to thank Douglas Skelding, the author of Ordeal by Fire, A History of Collingwood Fire Department, for writing the book that was so helpful in dating some of the fire photos. I believe there is a copy of it here on display. And I'd like to thank you for your attention and any help with identifying the photos. I'll collect any information you might have for me at coffee time. And there's a number of things on the table, pictures. Oh, there's one that my dad had, was a photo, but then he hand colored the photo. So there's one there. I found many bridal picture with little swatches of fabric stapled to it so that he would get the color right for the bridesmaids' dresses. So there's, that's how diligent he was to trying to keep it right. So there's also a sample of a postcard. There's my source material, some family photos. There's a sample of one of the negatives, so you saw what the 3,700 negatives look like. They're not just the normal negatives that we think of when we had our Instamatics back in the 70s. So they're a little bit different. So I guess that's all I have for tonight.
Anyone who talks about photography says that the purest form is black and white, and that's what you've seen tonight. And Mr. Saunders most definitely caught our town. And you've almost had a nostalgic stroll down our main street, down Wasaga Beach, out to Blue. I heard a lot of nodding and chatter as you hit different points, and people go, uh-huh, or I remember. And I encourage everybody to stick around, talk to Cathy and the family, because they are all knowledgeable. Cathy probably is the most knowledgeable. And I will say 2 years ago when I gave my talk on the changes of the main street, she graciously allowed me to use some of Mr. Saunders' photography in that to say, here's a spectacular fire, here's a building that was, and what do you think it is now? So on behalf of the Historical Society, I'd like to say thank you, and I'd like to give you a token of our appreciation. So a reminder to all, grab a coffee, have a chat with the family, check out what's up front, and maybe buy a picture. There's an